Next question. How do you deal with anger and flared tempers in yourself or your team? Leif, I'm going to go ahead and turn that one over to you.
I got a lot of experience with this one.
Leif's way more experienced than me.
Losing your temper.
I've got a lot of experience in this one, and I talked about being a direct guy, being a default aggressive guy, and that's good. There's a lot of good in that. There's also some bad when you lose your temper, when you lose your cool. One, when you get emotional about things and react to stuff, you don't make good decisions. And so, we always taught our guys that the most important quality they could have as a combat leader is to remain calm and make good decisions under chaos and pressure. So that doesn't happen when you lose your temper. When I look back on that, the other thing about it too is when you do lose your temper about stuff, and it's I can give you a number of scenarios where it happened, where if guys had. And people always think like SEALs are always focused all the time, and it's life and death for you guys out there. When we talk about businesses, they say that all the time, like it's life and death for you guys, so it's not really life and death for my guys, but how do I get them to stay focused? Guess what? People lose discipline, right? People lose discipline if there's not leaders that are holding those standards and pushing it hard. And I remember one time in particular, we were patrolling back to our combat outposts, and we've been on a long operation. It was a foot patrol into a dangerous area, and we captured a bunch of prisoners, and we had to walk them back on foot because there were so many IED threats in that area. I think we finally met up with some Bradley fighting vehicles, a smaller tank from the Army that came down. We loaded them up in that, and they took them back from there. But so we're walking back, patrolling back, and we're almost, we're still a few hundred yards back away from this combat outpost, but we're in enemy territory. And I could see that some of the guys are starting to not be as focused, like looking down their weapons and dropping security and those things. And I was infuriated by that. I was totally infuriated by that. And it was because I knew what was at stake, that look, if we're not disciplined all the way back until we're inside that wire of the friendly combat outpost, we could take fire at any moment. And if we're not watching, at that very second we get shot at, people might get killed. It decreases our probability of winning that firefight, of bringing everybody back. So it was a big deal. But I definitely lost my cool on that. When I came back, I was chewing ass and like fired up at people and like, here, this is why this is important. And I looking back on that now, like that's not the best way to do that, right? The best way to do that is to say, force guys to keep security, remind them to keep security certainly while it's happening, but getting back and saying, guys, here's why we got to keep security. I know we're only, a couple hundred yards from the combat outpost, but recognize there are enemy fighters out here, and they're going to hit us when we least expect it. And just because it hasn't happened to us before, even though we've done this dozens of times, does not mean that it won't happen to us the next time. And we can't, this is important. Think about how you would feel if somebody got killed when you were supposed to be holding security as they were crossing the street and you weren't paying attention.
It's interesting you use that example. I almost feel that you showing legit anger at that point was a positive thing. Like, you want to make it perfectly clear to everybody. And the way you get their attention, because it's not like you lose your temper all the time, is by, getting angry, and people go, oh, he doesn't lose his temper very often. Here he is, super fired up.
Well, I don't think it's a problem. It's not a problem to get angry. I got really, really angry.
Okay.
So it's one of those things where it would have been more effective for me to be stern and not back down from that in the least, and not treat it lightly in the least. I'm not saying that at all, but I think just to yell and scream and those things, it's just never the best way to get the point across.
You're right. That is true. If you completely lose and you're yelling and screaming, it's not a good thing.
And even though you're absolutely right, it was important, and I wanted that addressed. It was like it just wasn't the best way to address that. Looking back on that now, one time in particular too was. I can think when you wanted to make some changes to our operation.
Oh yeah, that's right.
I can't remember if we talked about that in the last podcast or not, but I was ready to cancel the op. Jocko came in and was like, well, what about this? Maybe do we look at it from this direction? Why don't you guys maybe patrol in on this route and not go across this bridge where there's a choke point and they might bury IEDs in the road? And I was like, we've been looking at this for hours. I was like, now he's changing it 10 minutes prior, like, cancel the op. And Jocko, he could have lost his cool with me because I just lost my cool. And we've been hours at this, and I was frustrated. I was ready to get this op launched, and all the paperwork requirements and the levels of approvals that we need, and running around trying to fix all these things. And he actually just looked at me and was like, "We don't need to cancel the op. It's fine. It's gonna be fine." And then you actually again asked me some questions like, does what I'm saying make sense? And I wanted to be like, no, I can't, but it was like, yes, it totally makes sense. Right. Yeah, it totally makes sense. You're like, okay, how long is it going to take to change it? And you're like, I was like, 2 minutes. You're like, well, we have 8 minutes left, so no problem.
Let's get it done.
We don't need to cancel the operation. I was like, no, we don't.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you said, it's important to maintain your cool. And the way I do that is by being detached. Talk about it all the time. In that situation, when you got all fired up at me, I was like, okay, Leif's getting fired up. And I didn't think Leif's getting fired up because he's immature or because can't control himself. I thought to myself, hey, you know what? He's been working on this all day. He's got a lot of pressure on him. There's a lot of frustration when you're doing these plans and doing all this paperwork. I understand where he's coming from. Let me give him some space, let him vent a little bit, and then let's reapproach this thing. That's how I'm coming at the situation. So
how you handle it, though, is perfect because had you blown back up at me, which is what the natural human reaction is, right? Then I get mad. We're yelling at even though we have a tremendously close relationship.
We would have canceled the op.
Yeah, it would have been a big deal. Or even if you end up saying, like, as so many leaders would do, like, you're gonna do it this way, and then I'm mad at you, and I'm all pissed off that you came in and trumped me. And,
oh yeah, and by the way, what happens when something goes wrong on the operation?
Then I'm like, Jocko told us to do it.
He told us to do this.
And then you have those frictions. But the best thing that you did in that situation was you actually just smiled and laughed at me, like, just take it easy.
Well, I didn't
not that big of a deal.
Just to make that clear, I didn't laugh at him like he was a little kid. I was just like, hey man, and he knows me, and he knows exactly where I was coming from. Like, hey. I know what's going on.
It was the perfect way to de-escalate the situation, which made me de-escalate.
Exactly.
And made me realize, like, yeah, it makes total sense. And then we executed it. It was no problem.
Yep. That's how you deal with. So when someone gets mad at you, de-escalate. When you feel yourself getting spun up, detach.
When have you got spun up and lost your cool?
I've said this before on the podcast. Printers and copy machines, they don't like me, and I don't like them. And so,
are we talking straight up Office Space style?
Office Space style. I don't like printers and copy machines. They don't ever do what I want them to do, and so I get angry at them. So I lose my mind a little bit. But no, I don't lose my temper very often. It doesn't do me a lot of good, and it usually doesn't help the situation. Doesn't help you solve the problem. And my mind is always, all right, how do I get this thing solved?
It never helps you solve the problem, that's for sure.
Nope.
So if you're like me and you lose your cool, you gotta practice it. You gotta rehearse that. You gotta make sure that you're detaching and not losing your cool so that you can get the job done and win.
That's what it's all about. And the Delta Platoon commander, he would go into a little bit of rage from time to time. and one day the Delta Platoon commander is going to be out of the military, and he's coming right on this podcast, and he knows it. He's fired up. But, he's my other brother, and that's going to be a good time. But, he would get some rage going, and I'd have to back him down a little bit and say, bro, it's me. No reason to get fired up right now. We're here to win,
yep.
And I'm here to help you. And he'd go, I know, but damn. Awesome. All right.